second and my old man works first. He tends the kids, 3. Better that way because he's patient. I ain't. Just my nature's all. No meanness, really. Just my nature. He makes them supper and warms it up for me when I get home. He feeds me and then goes to bed. Him so he can get up at 4 in the morning. And me because I'm tired as an old radio song. He puts his hands on me and sometimes I want it. Sometimes I take care to pick the lint from my hair and tip a little Rhonda Shalimar behind my ears and inside my arms. But one of us is always asleep before the love comes. Neither of us is disappointed. Tonight I'll have fried mackerel patties with cream potatoes, okra stewed with tomatoes. My old man can really cook. Now, one of the things that gets me in under the wire with the Appalachian culture, which I'm proud to be, connected to, is that when all those people came down out of Grayson County and Carroll County and Floyd County and all those counties up in the mountains, they brought their culture with them. And it's a darn good thing because it's some of the best music you'll ever hear. And whenever people away from the region talk about mountain music, they're thinking about, they always talk about square dancing. And I was like, no, we don't. And we don't clog and we don't square dance. We round dance and we flat foot. The big difference. And I had some champion flat-footers in my family. This is called house party. A claw hammer talks and a fiddle trills June bug music. Feet become instruments. Soldier's joy, forked deer. Otho's feet slip and glide across sawdusted boards. His jump so slight you can't see him carry melody on old toes. The bow draws a sad note from the fiddle strings, and Esley puts a plate on Otho's snowy head. His feet stroke pine boards. His head scarcely moves. Soles of his shoes pumice floorboards under his feet as if boards were strings that vibrate tone and rhythm under the dexterous weight of fingertips. Immersion. A lot of people, when they read my work, the novel, which they've got copies of back there, Sufficient Grace, and this, they really get confused, and so they start asking me, exactly what is your religious background? Because I was raised in part Catholic. My father was a big city Catholic from Memphis, and when I came along, he was a lapsed Catholic at the time and divorced, and but he got the idea that maybe I should go to church, and so he started going to church. But he didn't take sacraments, but he was always taking up collection and doing other things. And my mother was, I don't know what she was at the time, but it wasn't Catholic. But her family had a history of being Methodist and Baptist, and since then some of them have got fancy and become Lutherans and Episcopalians. But so it was real confused for me. And then I found the root of part of it. My grandfather had come down to Henry County to work in the mill. Actually, he didn't come down. He came up from Burlington. And when he met my grandmother, they got married. And eventually, he and a brother went in together and started a country store up at Dillon's Fork, which was a few miles out of Fieldale, which was several miles out of Martinsville. So Dillon's Fork was way up in the middle of nowhere. And it was sort of like a convenience store is today. They sold bread and milk and lots of things like that. But on Friday nights and Saturday nights, he ran a grill and sold hamburgers and hot dogs. And I don't want to offend anybody. I'm just giving you a report of an oral history that I took with my Uncle Junior. But he said there was nothing to do in Fieldale on Friday night. And so a Pentecostal preacher came and asked my grandfather if he would mind if he pulled some logs up across the road and preached and got some of the people coming out of the grill on Friday night. And my grandfather said that was fine with him. Saturday nights, my grandfather ran a dance hall in the back rooms and had dances back there. So he didn't, but Friday night was okay. So my uncle said that people would go buy a hot dog or hamburger and then they'd go watch the Holy Rollers instead of going to the movie because they didn't have enough money to go to the movie. And so clearly my uncle was not Pentecostal. But anyway, my grandfather thought this was a fine idea, to combine spirituality and enterprise. And so he put together a rolling wagon and took it up to his church, Missionary Baptist Church, Blackberry, and proceeded to sell hot dogs and hamburgers after church when people were coming out of church. And after the third week, the preacher came out and said, "You can't do that, Mr. Birch." And he said, "Well, I most certainly can." And he was like, "You most certainly cannot." And he said, "Well, fine, I'll just become a Methodist." So I have a very confused religious background. But when I wanted to write poetry, I was trying hard to write free verse because I didn't want anybody to tell me what to do, right? And then I quickly learned that you have to be able to use form to really say you're a poet. Whether you publish in form or not, you need to be able to handle it. And I heard Robert Morgan, another wonderful mountain poet, read a pantoum, which is a poem where every line is repeated twice and the first line is the same as the last line. And I was so taken with the music in that poem, and I had never gotten anything published at this point. I was just really starting to write poetry. It was when I began to realize that poetry was the only way I was ever going to be able to finish anything as a single mother. And so I tried and filled up several trash cans with balled up pieces of paper trying to write a pantoum. They all were terrible. And I was going through a drawer looking for something and found a picture of my mother being baptized in the river. And my mother is schizophrenic, but she wasn't diagnosed with schizophrenia until her 40s. And before that, she probably had some signs of she was probably bipolar, but nobody was diagnosing anybody back then with bipolar disorder, at least not in Henry County. And not that you would tell anybody. And so she was on a search. She was always on a search, and religion was one of the places she looked in her search. And so she was getting baptized in the river. And it dawned on me that religious language is naturally repetitive, and ritual language is naturally repetitive. And so I started writing this poem about my mother getting baptized in the river. And then I realized that, then suddenly she became a man. And that's when I knew that I really was a fiction writer and I was never going to be able to escape it because nobody would ever quite do what they were supposed to. And I had to go on beyond the real story. So this poem is called Immersion. While my trousers cling wet and heavy as past sins, women in hats stand on the bank and pray. Half bodies of men in white shirts bob on the river, their glazed foreheads glisten in God's own sun. Women in hats stand on the bank and pray, singing in disjointed chorus, "Praise Jesus, hallelujah." Their glazed foreheads glisten in God's own sun. Heads fall back calling, "God in heaven, cleanse this man." Singing in disjointed chorus, "Praise Jesus, hallelujah." Wash away his iniquity and cleanse him, hallelujah. Heads fall back calling, "God in heaven, cleanse this man." Icy fingers clamped over my face, push me down into the depths. Wash away his iniquity and cleanse him, hallelujah. Cleanse and sanctify Jesus in this holy water, God. Icy fingers clamped over my face, push me down into the depths. They call on God in the river to wash me in the blood of the Lamb. Cleanse and sanctify Jesus in this holy water, God. Half bodies of men in white shirts bob on the river. They call on God in the river to wash me in the blood of the Lamb, while my trousers cling, wet and heavy as past sins. And religion was a really, really, really important part of the mill community, and part of that mountain community as well. And when I moved to Fieldale to live with my grandmother after my mother was hospitalized for schizophrenia, I remember riding the school bus the first day, and this young girl asked me what church I went to, and I said, "Well, I go to the Catholic church in town." And she said, "Oh, y'all are the ones that don't believe in Jesus, right?" And I was like, "No, that's the Jews. We're the ones that worship Mary." I heard my grandmother say that. "Oh, we just worship Mary." But and my grandmother was very suspicious of Catholicism, like a lot of people are to this day. I'm even kind of suspicious of it myself. And this is the story of how my grandparents came to be in Fieldale. Sabbath. Dawes was a son of Eden, North Carolina. Brother Charlie in Virginia didn't give him a rib, but he gave him a leg up, a hand, some fingers. Helped him get his foot in the door of the mill. Then hosiery, cow mill, then hosiery. Finally furniture. But they abandoned looms and lathes for a cafe that fed the bellies of industry, an army whose only cause was to make a living. Dawes happened on Maudie just down the mountain. They both left paradise for work. He tempted her, invited her to take a spin in his sidecar. She stared, shocked. He said, "Now or never." There's no accounting for actions taken at a crossroads. She stood there by the mailbox, clutching words. The wind shifted, blew the words away. Doss built a log store at Dillon's Fork. Of a Friday and Saturday night, Doss fired up a grill and his fiddle and played devil music. Called the steps in the back room they used for a dance hall. A holy roller pulled up logs on the hill across the road to save souls coming out. Customers sat and watched, feasting on hot dogs and cheeseburgers, said it was closer than the theater. Maud seldom danced. She patted her feet to the fiery tunes, tilted her head to the drone and slide, tapped fingers on her big thighs while her children twirled across the floor. A jealous man, Doss would get nervous, get ideas, sprinkle sand at the back steps and watch for footprints. Doss planted 2 chinaberry trees at the edge of the garden, shady umbrellas for courting after marriage, a place to look back. She'd sit with him of an evening. They'd talk about temptation and what it got him. Early Sundays, he'd bathe, strop and blade slapped and slid. He shaved his high cheekbones, handed down to his daughters and granddaughters. Maud said they came from a trace of Injun blood. He slipped long legs into freshly pressed trousers, pulled a newly stretched band collar shirt over work-muscled arms and plowman shoulders, suspenders, black socks with garters, brogans spit polished like he learned to do in the Army, as if shined shoes could save you. Maud sent the girls each in their turn to the chinaberries. To each girl he said, "Oh, how purty." The daughters loved him slightly more than his sons. Sons go fight their own wars, have their own women. Dressed for church, he opened a wooden box and drew out one Eucharist, a Cuban cigar. He took his communion at the edge of the yard in one of the Adirondack chairs. Maud and the girls gone to Blackberry to sing hymns and hear about damnation. Doss remained in the chair he built under the chinaberries he planted. He meditated on his brick-red earth, on apple blossoms or tart apples ready to fall, cherries dripping like blood, pole beans hanging heavy, corn green and tasseled or dry and shocked. He cogitated on honeysuckle and sawbriars overtaking the barbed wire. He pondered spring's buttercups and summer's hollyhocks wet with Sunday's dew. He drank in Pentecost of fall's fire, wrapped in God's handiwork, rendered from love and labor of flesh. A trice of grace beneath uncommon trees, this son of Eden held service of his design. If he had sins, it was there, at the edge of the garden, he repented. Beneath the trees, he was saved. All right, I'm going to leave you with one funny poem. Oh, actually, that's not funny. I'll read this one last poem. Well, maybe I'll read the funny one too. Work. You wake up knowing you'll work. You don't worry that circumstances will hurt your chances to choose your labor. It seems your choice is made. Reams of fabric undergird your life, but fate may lead you down a surprising path. One day you may wake up and find you had more choices than you knew. You leave your bed, your home, with voices carried in your head of who you leave behind. Here you live out your path with collective memory. Veneer line. I worked one for 3 months between Lejeune and college, after 2 babies. Worked to the tune of minimum wage, 10-hour days, and cold furniture. Once I went into the deafening grind and buzz of the machine room, my only factory stint. Never set foot in a towel mill, but that doesn't matter. I dream my mother's and grandmother's dreams. Dreams of clatter and snap, of doffers and fixers, of motion. I dream threads streaming from cotton icicles mounted on frames, spinning dripping cones, feeding hungry looms, that pulse and ripple as they weave. Shuttles throwing thread, clack.